Hello and welcome to Stats and Scheme. I am Shawn Syed, joined as always by my good friend Seth. Today we're looking ahead to the Week 7 slate of games. We will do longer previews on Lions, Vikings, and Chiefs 49ers before getting to our usual fun. Tej, how you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm excited to read some of your articles today. How was it with being in Seattle last week? Not having all six monitors that you use to put together a lot of your film breakdowns that go on Twitter or go on the Sumer Sports website.
Tasha, I'm glad you asked that because we had this like on site, or I guess an offsite technically, like everyone gets together, you work through your team, and like the whole entire time leading up to it, I was like, guys, please let's push it to the end of the week. Like help me out, help me out, help me out. And thankfully we do it at the end of the week so I can fly back directly into that London game, get everything going. Tasha, I can't be without my multiple monitor setup. How am I supposed to do the work there? But I do appreciate you checking in for that. All right, so we'll start with Lions, Vikings. I think since we've talked about like a bunch of these teams so many times, spend maybe a little bit less time just on like the overarching kind of scheme, so we can maybe talk just a little bit more about kind of specific matchup things. We'll start with Vikings offense versus Lions defense. The Vikings offense, like they want to push the ball down the field. KOC is going to continue to have that high pass rate. Obviously, you're going to scheme everything around Justin Jefferson, but I watch teams around the league and they have really good receivers, and these guys aren't getting open in the same way as Jefferson, partially because of maybe the route running, but also I think KOC does a really good job of finding different ways to spring him open, whether he's used, as a crosser and you get traffic for him, or you're using him as a little bit of a decoy, and then you get a guy like that speedy Jalen Naylor kind of running away. And then, of course, Jordan Addison is able to route you up there as well. I do want to talk about Aaron Jones, his injury. They just traded for Cam Akers. I don't know if we take that as like a sign for, maybe Aaron Jones is not going to be back in this game. I do think that does make a difference in this one overall. We'll get to that a little bit more when we talk about the matchup. What are some of the numbers you have for the Vikings offense?
Yeah, when you look at the Vikings offense as a whole, the overall numbers don't really do it justice on how good their offense has been this year, just because they've been leading so much in so many games, where they've just gotten to a point where they've ran the ball a lot. They really haven't had to show a lot of their best stuff late in games. So they do rank 14th in EPA per play on the season so far, but just applying a slight garbage time filter, we just filter out plays that happen when a team has under a 4% win probability. The Vikings jump all the way up to sixth in offensive EPA per play, which is probably around where they should be. They're second in EPA per drop back in that same garbage time filter, but they're 23rd in EPA per rush. So very, very high end passing offense as we have seen so far this season. And Kevin O'Connell has done a good job of leaning into that passing efficiency, where they have the fourth highest pass rate over expected in the league. And like you mentioned, they really want to throw the ball downfield, where they have the third highest average up the target right now. And something that's interesting about the Vikings offense, and what it was, post the TJ Hawkinson trade, was that really increased their average up the target in this Kevin O'Connell offense, where Kirk Cousins wanted to throw further down the field to Justin Jefferson when they had Hawkinson working in the intermediate areas. And without Hawkinson so far this year, that's been replaced with Addison and Naylor, where Jefferson can still work downfield where he's very effective, while Addison, when he's healthy, and then Naylor, who's had a pretty good season, have filled in kind of that intermediate area. And then they can use Aaron Jones as kind of that check down type of guy as well. So they really just have players at three levels of the field that can really do well when they are throwing to them, and the ball is coming out of Sam Darnold's hands.
Yeah, it is a great offensive ecosystem. I talk about Kevin O'Connell all the time. I really, really just continue to feel positive about him. I think, against the Jets cornerbacks, they played pretty tight on the outside and were able to kind of just cause a few issues. But in the Jets game and in the Packers game, they did have, I think you can call them like God habit drives. Like if you don't score in this situation, the other team can kind of go down and maybe tie the ball game up. They're able to get field goals in both of those situations. I do want to ask you just a quick question about like win probability filters. So of course there's the like, hey, what based on the model, like you do it at like 5% or 2%, you keep it kind of low. Could you also just like have situation specific where it's like, all right, well, we're just going to remove all the situations where it's like, instead of just based on probability, just on what the model may spit out, like end of half, like a minute left down by, or like a kneel down situation, or more importantly, like end of fourth quarter, down by 10 points or something there? Or do you think that just gets captured in the percentage models and I'm kind of overthinking it?
No, I don't think you're thinking it at all there. End of half should be downweighted a little bit just because of how behavior changes in those situations. And when you think about how these expected point models or win probability models are trained in general, they sometimes bake in some of that suboptimal behavior where if you are in an end of half situation and there's 40 seconds left and you just kneel it out and go into halftime, that's kind of like baked into some of the expected points model training where like, oh yeah, some teams just kneel it out, some teams actually go for it. So it's like it'll look better for you if you drive and go further down the field, even if the defense is in prevent or there's just different situations there. So I do think that's a good point about like when you look at a drive level metric for any team, like kind of understanding which drives are included and which should be downweighted can be helpful in terms of predictiveness going forward.
All right, let's move on here to the Lions defense. Of course, a man coverage heavy defense. It's going to be the first game without Aiden Hutchinson or after that big injury. I'm really just curious to see, does that change their identity? I would assume no, and that they're still going to be, man coverage in your face sort of defense. Now, that coverage looks better when you have a star defensive end that's able to just totally ruin an offensive game plan. I wonder, is it going to be situations where they blitz? Are they going to be able to, generate pressure inside with our guy, Ali McNeil, getting paid? There we go. Love to see that. What are some of the numbers you have for the Lions defense?
Lions defense has played a lot better this year than they have these past couple seasons, where they rank eighth in EPA per play allowed right now and have been good against both the pass and the rush. What's really interesting about how teams are approaching facing the Lions defense this year is they really want to have a high pass rate over expected. Some of that is probably just the threat of playing the Lions offense and teams kind of feeling like they have to keep up, but also just how the Lions defense has been built where they were really good against the run last year. And teams haven't seemed to fully adjust to that this year, where they're pretty even against both the run and the pass in terms of ordinal ranking. But they have had some pretty big turnovers, some pretty big sacks that have made their overall production look a little bit better than they've been on a down to down basis. And Aiden Hutchinson was obviously a huge part of getting those sacks. So without him, it'll be harder to create a lot of those negative plays, the explosive play for a defense. But they'll just continue to have to rely on the interior defensive line with DJ Reader and Elite McNeil being their strong point of their defensive line, as well as just some of the players they have in the secondary, like Brian Branch and Kirby Joseph, that can really cause turnovers on the back end.
Brian Branch. Love watching that guy play football. I do think when you're a defense that is gonna play that tight man coverage style, it's not a dice roll, but you're kind of as like a philosophy saying we're gonna have games where teams are able to kind of move the ball down the field, but we just need an interception like to really, really kind of win this game, particularly for this team when you have an offense that is just so good and is just churning out drive after drive. I think it's easy to feel like it's a sound strategy when you are getting a turnover, but you are putting yourself in those situations, I think, a little bit more, just playing tight and, forcing some of those tight throws where, like, think about this with Sam Darnold, maybe you get Darnold kind of forcing it into a tight window. You get a deflection, you get an interception, and now you're like at the high level, you're not exactly manufacturing a turnover. Like it is going to be based on different things. But like you mentioned, I always get concerned when if the pressure is not going to be there just because that solves so many issues for you. Obviously, like if every person's covered in man coverage, the quarterback can't go anywhere, but that's just so rare, particularly thinking about this game where Kevin O'Connell knows that you're going to play a bunch of man coverage. He's seen times where the Lions have had like an extra safety kind of over the top of Justin Jefferson in different ways, even while playing man coverage elsewhere. He's going to have beaters for it. Like he's absolutely going to have plays specifically designed to beat your coverage and create some openings. So, how everything kind of just works out is going to be fun to watch. What do you think just like a really positive matchup here is for the Vikings offense?
The Vikings offense is going to have an advantage when the Lions play man coverage in this game. And we know Aaron Glenn likes to play man coverage. It's been his thing in Detroit these past couple seasons. They play the sixth most man in the league right now, as charted by FTN data. And this is probably the first time that you can feel comfortable with the Lions playing man just because of the players that they have in the secondary, the resources that they put into that position, into those positions. But the thing is that they are facing off against the Vikings offense that has the highest EPA per pass in the NFL against man coverage. And a big part of that is just what happens to Justin Jefferson when the Vikings are seeing man coverage, where his target share jumps dramatically. He has a 43.6% target share against man coverage. So that's Sam Darnold's clear answer when he sees man, is to just throw it to Justin Jefferson, which, as we know, is a great strategy all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that target share number. It does feel like from an offensive perspective, like maybe two or a year or two ago, Justin Jefferson just like always the first read, like as part of the concept. Now there are more times where not that Jefferson's not the first read, but as I mentioned, he's being used in a way to really pull coverage because you can feel kind of confident elsewhere. It's an interesting styles make fights kind of game because as you mentioned at the line, they're gonna play a ton of man coverage. They're not just gonna like undo what they did. Like the first game of the season last year where the Lions play some more kind of zone coverage against the Chiefs. Maybe they're pulling out that sort of game plan in a bit of a different way. I do want to see for the Vikings offense, like really, really make Terry Arnold's life just super hard. I think, Jordan Addison is a real route runner. I think Jalen Naylor, again, he can win. He's certainly going to win more with speed, but just make it a track meet for these guys. Have them running across, sideline to sideline constantly. Make them work through traffic and, make Aaron Glenn decide, are you going to get to some of your zone coverage answers? Or is it, hey, we're going to just, keep the safety over the top of Jefferson and now you got to go kind of beat us elsewhere. And, Arnold it's a fun watch for me again, because like I like his kind of like outward facing personality a lot. I do think like there are clearly things in man coverage that he's going to need to continue to clean up. Now, do I think some of the pass interference or holding calls, like some are a little bit ticky tack, some are like yes, they're penalties. Tage, I do love though, like if you watch a cornerback on the TV copy, no cornerbacks ever thought that they've committed pass interference. I do love that. It's like you just tackle a guy, and then of course you're not going to say that anything bad happened. Let's think about it from the other side here. What do you think is a positive matchup here for the Lions defense?
Yeah, so now we're flipping it. We just talked about how the Vikings have the advantage when the Lions are playing man coverage. The Lions will have an advantage when they play zone coverage. And you can't just say, like, oh, play zone the entire game. Like, obviously, you want to have some sort of diversity in terms of your coverage calls if you're Aaron Glenn. But the Lions should lean into zone more in this game because the Vikings rank 29th in EPA per pass against zone coverage. And what we've seen from Sam Darnold this year in terms of target distribution when he faces zone, he's throwing at Aaron Jones more. He's throwing at Johnny Munt more. Like those are just players that aren't going to be as efficient as throwing to Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison. So getting into zone, forcing Darnold to hold on to the ball a little bit longer than getting to that first read Jefferson throw will be beneficial to the Lions defense in this game if they feel comfortable playing that way.
I like that idea because as much as I just did the whole, oh, I love man coverage, go ahead, force a turnover. I do think there is an important aspect to like the offense is expecting you to play man coverage. Do you have the flexibility in this specific matchup where I don't know, does anyone feel comfortable playing man coverage against Justin Jefferson? I would assume probably not. Well, I mean the Jets did do a good job again. Not exactly in man coverage, a lot of zone, but that's a separate thing. So I do want to see that I like that point. How much zone are they going to end up playing? Whether it's a good point. Like, can you make Darnold just hold the ball just an extra tick? Can you get him to pat the ball extra? I do want to see the Lions creating internal pressure over that right guard spot for the Vikings, where that's just, been just a little bit of an issue over the years. I hope that's because I'm always rooting for Lee McNeil, certainly because your love for him. Like, just get a swim move over him. You're going to be able to create pressure in that spot. And if you tie that to some of your zone coverage, even if you're tying that to your man coverage, I think that can be a good situation. I'm trying to think just like a really fun matchup here is the kind of higher level, like can Kevin O'Connell just like kind of break Aaron Glenn's desire to play man coverage. I think we're going to get a little bit of signal just based on what are the amount of zone coverage calls for Glenn when we look at some of the charting kind of after, because is it, does your game plan change just based on who they are? Like how much do you shift your identity just a little bit? With lines, I mean, of course they play zone coverage, but I just think like when the chips are down, Aaron Glenn wants to play tight man coverage. So I think that will be a fun one to watch. Wait, what's just a fun matchup for you here for the Vikings offense versus the Lions defense?
Yeah, the one for me will be just Brian Branch kind of versus this Vikings offense as a whole, but particularly like when Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison are running in his vicinity, how does he handle their situation? And I love this tweet from Kyron Samuels where he pointed out Brian Branch has played 4 games this year and the stats he's accumulated: 28 tackles, 9 pass breakups, 3 interceptions, 2 tackles for loss, and a forced fumble. So like he is just someone who will fly around the field. And we talked about how important turnovers can be for this Lions defense, in this game in particular, but like how they've been so far this season. And they're going to need a turnover or two to kind of stay in this game from a defensive perspective, just because of the Vikings' talent on offense. So if you can force Darnold into a situation where he's throwing to Branch, and Branch is able to get the interception, or Branch or Kirby Joseph or someone on the back end is able to force a fumble, like that will go a long way for the Lions in this game, especially with how their offense is playing right now.
I'm just so happy that Brian Branch like really continued to ascend this year because you certainly saw it on tape. Last year obviously in college at Alabama as well. But when a player just kind of continues to improve and it's like, oh, like he's just a star. Like that's kind of what this situation is going to be. I really really do just love that situation for Detroit. Trying to think of just kind of fun matchups from the Lions defensive side. I'm excited to watch. Just Jack Campbell in space. What do the Vikings do to conflict him? Forcing him to move side to side. I think Campbell's, felt a little more comfortable at times this year and been able to make plays, whether he's, tracking a guard like against the Cardinals. I do think that will be kind of fun. I don't know if you have any ideas for a fun matchup for the Lions defense here.
Yeah, I do like the Jack Campbell one a lot. Like, definitely think he's improved with some of his play this year, but still some work to do. In terms of his linebacker play. But yeah, I like the one that you also mentioned with Ali McNeil versus the interior offensive line of the Vikings, where the Vikings, if they can hold up there because of how long Sam Darnold's time to throw and average up the target have been this year, like he is really someone that wants to hold on to the ball longer and push the ball downfield, and really just try to get the ball to his pass catchers. Like if McNeil is able to get quick pressures under 2.5 seconds, like really get into the backfield, like we saw against the Cowboys, the Lions defense can have a chance to make a decent amount of stops in this game. But if him and Reader aren't able to get pressure on the interior, then the Vikings will have their script that they want, where Darnold can stand back in the pocket, assess all of his options, and find his receivers downfield.
I'm just really curious to see, how much man coverage are you going to be able to play? How many man coverage beaters are the Vikings going to have? Is this like an abandon the run game kind of situation if you're able to continue to have success there? But then at the same time, I think the Lions certainly without Hutchinson on the edge, maybe just a touch softer. Like, are you able to kind of run to the edge where the Vikings really have good tackles? And on the defensive side, just, how are you generating pressure? Kind of what are your changeups? Tage, let's flip it over here to the Lions offense versus the Vikings defense. I mean, the Lions offense is my favorite offense in the league, and the Vikings defense is my favorite defense in the league. So it's kind of sick that we get this matchup. Like, how lucky are we? I want to see a few different things from the Lions offense here. I would really love to see them push the ball down the field. I think that would be a lot of fun. Like, let's finally do that against the Vikings defense. We'll talk about that a little bit more here. Tage, what do you have for the Lions offense from a numbers view?
Yeah, Lions offense has again been very fun to watch so far this year. Fourth in EPA per play on the season, eighth in EPA per pass, and first in EPA per rush. And that rushing number really stands out because it shows you not only that Dave Montgomery and Jameer Gibbs are having good rushing seasons, which they are, but like the offensive line is the engine of this offense. And so much of what they do in terms of the pass game concepts and the run game concepts boil down to just having such a strong offensive line. And so when they can get very personnel diverse, where they're bringing on a sixth offensive lineman, and really just like showing you that they're going to run the ball and be able to do it effectively, and there's not much you can do about it. Or they can get more into 3, 4 wide receiver sets now that they have like players like Jamison Williams and Tim Patrick out there, and having Goff drop back and feel comfortable behind that offensive line. Like the play of Penny Sewell, Frank Wagner, Taylor Decker, like all those guys have been so good this year, and that's why the Lions offense has been able to perform so well.
Yeah, we talked like so at length about the Lions offense and Ben Johnson when we were talking about the review of the Cowboys game earlier this week. Just a great example of a play caller who was constantly going to push the run button, but has just so much creativity in terms of explosive plays. And really, you use guys like Jamison Williams kind of over the middle to really just, run teams out of the gym in different ways. So I think that's going to be a fun one to monitor. Let's flip over to the Vikings defense here. Again, my favorite defense in the league. It's just a beautiful combination of the pressures that they have, the rotations on the back end that they have, and then you also have player versatility, like what guys are lining up in what spots, like the skill set versatility, where a guy like Josh Metellus is able to be a playmaker in this defense because of the specific great skills he has, and just putting players in positions to win. And it feels like now they can play you straight up. Like they don't have to rush 6, 7, 8 at times, which is a really, really good situation. What are some of the numbers you have here for the Vikings defense?
Yeah, I mean, this Vikings defense has been the best in terms of EPA per play allowed in the league so far this season. They're top three against both the pass and the run. And the point that you brought up there, where you don't have to scheme pressures and sacks as much with the talent on this year's defense than last year, but having this talent plus the scheme has just like created this really high end pass rush where they have the eighth highest sack rate in the league right now, and they have players like our guy Andrew Van Ginkel, who's been generating a lot of pressure. Jonathan Grenard has played pretty well, and then on the back end, like they can fill it in with Josh Metellus, and Blake Cashman and Ivan Pace Jr. to really just provide extra support there. And so this Vikings defense is going to run a lot of zone. Behind some of the pressures that they're doing up front. And it's just been a great job again by Brian Flores to mix some of the new zone concepts that a lot of teams have been running in the past couple of years with some of the high end or heavy just blitz packages that he's going to send at the opposing offense.
Yeah, and I'm glad you and kind of mentioning that because they'll have the two high safety, like three defenders, kind of to each side, safety corner, and then an inside piece where you're playing 3 over 2 to each side. You're still able to send 5 rushers, so you're kind of keeping that back end protection. They'll stunt the guys just a touch to really get kind of advantage against the offensive line, and just against an offensive line that is really really good for the Lions. That is going to be a fun one. What's maybe a matchup that you like here for the Lions offense against the Vikings defense?
It's hard to find something that the Vikings defense is not good against. So I was really searching here, and the one thing I was able to find is that they haven't been great on deep passes. So passes 15 or more air yards. They're 12th in EPA per play allowed, which is like one of the only things that they don't rank top 10 in against. And Lions have been able to really get into a lot more deep passing this year now that they have a deep passing threat in Jamison Williams, who's really emerged. And we have seen, Ben Johnson scheme up deep passes against the Vikings in years past. So I think he's really going to try to just like stretch them vertically on a couple times this season. And the progression of it will probably be like the establish the run, start to use the intermediate area of the field, and then you'll see Goff like sometime in the third quarter just get into like a deep play action, deep shot to Jameson Williams. And if they can connect on that, I think that would be really big for the Lions offense.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, hey, let's do an early downs too. They've had early down pass success against the Vikings before. I'd love to see that again. I'm glad you mentioned that deep passing because when you look at the Vikings on paper, like the cornerbacks on the outside is who you want to find ways to attack. Now the Vikings do a good job of finding ways to have a safety over the top. You're easing things on your cornerbacks just a little bit. And there's a real question like, can you protect it up front if you're Detroit? I think like a team like Detroit can because their offensive line is so good. But you see, like the Packers, where they had some success. Again, it was later in the game, like they were already down by so much. But like, you just have to be comfortable, I think, taking deep shots against this team. I do think, in that intermediate area of the field, there can be some kind of air, some open space in the Vikings zone coverage. So, if the Vikings are sending 5 consistently because they feel like they have to do that to manipulate things in the run game, that could be a game or just a spot of the game where the Lions are able to make some of those quick throws kind of over the middle of the field. And I really want to see just how Goff plays under pressure in this game. I thought he played well under a few pressure situations against Dallas. Let's keep that rolling, Jared Goff. I'm always rooting for that. Let's talk a little bit just about a matchup you like for the Vikings defense here.
Mentioned this a little bit when we were talking about the Vikings defense as a whole, but they like to play a lot of zone coverage, behind some of the pass rush stuff that they're doing up front. The Lions have been much better against man coverage than zone this year in terms of when they're dropping back. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how the Lions handle the zone coverage, and just like would love to hear from you on how the Lions can put together a plan to attack the zone coverage that the Vikings will run a lot in this game.
I think when you think about zone coverage kind of at a higher level, there's, you can target kind of natural weak points, whether it's, cover 2, you're kind of conflicting the corner. Cover 3, you're usually kind of finding ways to throw in the seam. Against man coverage, you're kind of finding ways to create traffic. Or you can conflict defenders. So you're sending kind of a player like below the player, above the player. Now this player can't cover both. We can kind of throw off of it. Or, in zone coverage so many times, you can turn it into one-on-ones where if you're playing cover three, for example, on the outside, certainly there's a specific technique to that outside third zone coverage. But after, a certain point, it's going to be your receiver against the cornerback. And then another way to, I think, kind of attack zone coverage is just, can you force miscommunication across multiple players? And I think it's important to go through that list because Detroit really does it all. Like they do every single bit of that. They have specific coverage beaters. They know how to conflict defenders where within the pass concept, they do a good job of like allowing Goff to read it out. So you actually have players that are conflicting zone defenders. So I really like what the Lions do kind of overall. For me, I hope that, Johnson finds just ways, just test intermediate over the field, do it early. See how much, like, are they going to be able to pass Jamison Williams off through multiple people on a crosser? Is he going to be able to just run by people? Is it a situation where you get a vertical from one side and Jamison coming across from the other because the Vikings want to stay in those two high looks? And look, I think you should, like, Williams is faster than so many people in the league. Like, you should be able to use that as a way to attack deep. And again, like if you can run on them and not just like, oh, like we need to establish it, but like it really does cause issues because the Vikings, their linebackers have done such a good job of like deferring the run sometimes and just going to cover a crosser. But hey, if you got David Montgomery running at you, it's a little bit tougher to do that. Tage, what are outside of just maybe a best matchup, just a matchup you're looking forward to here for the Lions offense against the Vikings defense?
Something that I'll try to keep my eye on in this game is what Penei Sewell and Taylor Decker look like against Van Ginkel and Grenard, where you have these just like really high end players on both sides of the ball. And I'm sure Flores is going to really do a good job of trying to move Van Ginkel and Grenard around the Lions offensive line, where you're maybe getting them matched up on the guards a little bit more because like you want to avoid having your best pass rusher go up against Sewell, just because he is the strong link on an offensive line system that is usually made up of a weak link or two, where the Lions don't really have a weak link. So it'll be really interesting to see what Flores does with respect to like how he places his pass rushers in this game, and how much he wants to put them over the guards versus like just kind of leave them out there on the tackles and go strength on strength.
I as I mentioned, like this is my favorite defense in the NFL right now. But like you mentioned, I feel like the Lions offense does really match up well everywhere. And I guess the Lions offense matches up well with everyone because they're so good. They can beat you inside in the run game. They can beat you in the pass game. I guess thinking about situation from the other side here, I do want to see the Vikings, can you just force Jared Goff into kind of tighter windows at different times? I do think that Goff, he can certainly throw that kind of outside throw against cover two. The Lions do a good job of having pass concepts where they know how to tie down really multiple defenders. When like you see St. Brown running across the field now, like three zone defenders are pulled down, you get kind of something going over the top of it. So that's something I think I'll be monitoring. Just Goff has looked really good this year, so I want to see him continue to build off that game against Dallas. What do you have for maybe just a fun matchup here from the Vikings defense side?
The fun matchup for the Vikings defense will be when they send blitzes against the Lions, where, according to FTN charting, they have the third highest blitz rate in the league at 31% right now. They're the fifth best defense when blitzing. So, they've obviously been really good when sending extra pass rushers so far this season, but they're facing a Lions offense that it ranks first in EPA per dropback against the blitz so far this season, which is just a testament to not only Lions protection plan, but how Jared Goff has kind of ID'd and delivered against the blitz. So it'll be fascinating to watch like Flores and seeing like how often he wants to blitz in this game. If the blitzes aren't working early, will he just be like trying different types of blitzes? Will he go away from it completely? This matchup is like so much fun because you have these two defensive coordinators that really like to do a lot of what they do on like a game to game basis. Like they're not going to change their identity drastically based on the opponent, but like what they like to do is like what the offense is really good against. So between with Glenn and Flores, so that's what will make this matchup really fun.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned the blitz there because, as I mentioned, Goff looked good against pressure against the Cowboys, and like I mentioned, I think he's been playing well at different points this year. But you still want to find ways to create pressure situations where now he's moving off the spot. He can't just kind of read 1 to 2 to 3 to check down. Like you really want to get him to work, moving laterally, moving around the pocket in that way. I'm just so curious, like how much is Brian Flores just gonna, you know, like how much you have to devote to the threat of the run. Where the Lions, if they're going to be a hot, like a low pass rate over expected team, they're going to be running early and often. They're really like establish it. Like they're the team that has established it, like with an exclamation point. So I want to see how does that kind of manipulate things on the back. And it's just a fun, like this is my favorite game of the year so far. It's Sam Darnold versus Jared Goff. I do love that so much. Like it's a real just fun game, I think, in so many